There are a lot of tutorials online about doing scene transitions in Unity, but I found most of them are designed for small projects or smaller scenes, and there are some things that need to be addressed for larger projects to work correctly. Standard scene transitions are composed of the following. You have scene A, the scene you want to start off with, which contains your canvas object, a UI image, and a transition script. Scene B, your destination scene. The normal process is to wrap the transition scene in Don't Destroy Unload, which will preserve the canvas and the UI image for the transition. The main issue with this approach is that you are locked into having to start on scene A to make sure that the transition script is properly preserved in the game flow. Any changes to how the transition works, visual or additional loading steps, need to be handled in that original scene. So what I propose to do is to make a scene that's dedicated to transitioning between other scenes. So an example, you have a source scene, which will be scene A. You have a destination scene, which will be scene B. And you have a transition scene. The transition scene is composed of a camera, a canvas, a UI image, and a transition script. So you start with the source scene. It calls a function on the transition scripts indicating which scene that we want to load and which scene is calling the load, so the destination and the source respectively. The static function stores the provided scene names into static variables and begins loading our transition scene. So once the transition scene is loaded, the transition script itself will actually start running an update and automatically switch its current phase into load in. I break code that runs into phases into enumerations to keep code separated. The main enumerations I have in this example are none, load in, load levels, and load out. The first main phase, load in, uses mathf.lerp to transition the canvas image from transparent to opaque, so from 0 to 1. A couple notes before this will work. First, in order for the transition camera to see the source scene camera content, you need to change the background type to uninitialized. Second, the canvas sort order needs to be a high value in order to properly cover your other scene's canvases. Once the canvas image is fully opaque, having a value of 1, you switch the primary active scene in the scene manager to the transition scene. This is an important step that we need to do before we can remove the source scene or scene A. We also switch our current phase to load levels. During the load levels phase, we unload the source scene and start loading our destination scene. These steps can be done separately, unloading first and then loading your destination second, if you have complex singleton objects that make it confused with both scenes being active at the same time. Both unload and load async operations are complete. You can set the destination scene to be the primary active scene in the scene manager and switch the current phase to load out. So load out consists of code similar to load in and start fading out the black UI image by using the same mathf.lerp code but going from opaque to transparent, so from 1 to 0. When the transition UI image has become fully transparent, you can unload the transition scene and clear any of the static variables. So that's the basic scene setup for a transition. There's more you can do with this. Within the transition scene, you can wire up UI elements that respond to async operation.progress and show how far the scene is with loading. And you can also provide user input to go to the next scene. You can choose not to automatically fade out to the next scene, but instead to wait for the player to press a key first. I'm using that currently in the game I'm working on called After Corruption. There are a few smaller things that should be pointed out if you're going to be working on scene transitions. One, the Unity player input class will consider a second object as a second player, so when loading between scenes, you either need to destroy your player input or disable it before loading the destination scene. if you're making a multiplayer game, the player input has to use don't destroy unload, otherwise the game will think a player dropped when unloading the scene. You'll have to load your next scene assuming that that player is already there. By default, you're going to see a lot of there are 2 audio listeners in the scene. Please ensure there's always exactly 1 audio listener in the scene, because every camera has an audio listener attached to it. So my current solution is to actually have listeners be off by default and only turn them on when the scene has properly finished a transition.